Hello, and welcome to yet another episode of the Back to the TARDIS podcast, a Doctor Who podcast. I'm Jeff.
I'm Aubrey.
I'm Miss A.G. Penis. And fuck, I thought this was a Star Trek podcast.
Oh no! Hate to pull the rug out from under your feet. Today we are discussing Ghostlight, which is the second story in season 26, Classic Who's final season, written by Mark Platt. This was not the final story to be aired, but the final story to be filmed for Classic Who.
Wow.
And boy, this one's a fucking weird one. Before we get into discussing it at all, I'd like to make a comment for behind the scenes of... So Mark Platt was one of only two writers to get a script accepted for the show without having any professional writing experience whatsoever and no writing background beyond fan fiction. And this was supposed to be, there may not actually, this story may be apocryphal because I did not find it on a wiki. I found it on TV Tropes. But from what I understand, the story as initially handed in was too long to be 4 episodes, and then it had to be trimmed down to 3 for budget reasons. So there's a lot of stuff in the story that it just kind of doesn't tell you and is just like, fuck you, figure it out for yourself, because they literally didn't have time. Even with the extended version that we watched that extended every episode by like 2 to 5 minutes.
Yeah, I don't think I would have known what was going on at all if I hadn't looked at the Wikipedia halfway through the first episode because I was already lost.
Yeah. If you go to the normal Wikipedia page for this story, not the TARDIS wiki, the normal Wikipedia page for this story, there's an entire paragraph of stuff in the synopsis that is the first paragraph in the synopsis that is all stuff that happens before Seven and Ace even land.
Yes.
Yeah, I had to reference the wiki too. It was a lot, and even with the extra stuff, it was definitely necessary to go to a second source.
Yeah.
Okay, I feel like it was a blink and I missed a thing, because did that stuff actually happen on screen? Because I feel like I maybe spaced out for a second and missed all of that.
If it's anything that happened before the Doctor and Ace landed there, no, it did not happen on screen.
Okay, I thought
it is alluded to, or maybe explained at some point by someone else, but it is never actually shown on screen.
I thought I was going insane because I was are they gonna reveal this at some point? And they just kind of don't.
Yeah, with all the issues it has with content, and also probably, at least for me, with pacing. I don't know how the episode feels without the extra stuff in it, but it feels at least that the extra stuff didn't help in the pacing department. It's definitely a shift from last episode we covered, which while definitely stretching things out a bit longer, still felt like it moved. This just kind of went wherever it wanted to.
Yeah, it is also funny too, because as we talked about, last time's episode was the height of viewing figure popularity for the show, whereas this was at its very end, where I don't know if it was its absolute nadir, viewing ratings wise, but it was at the point where nobody cared anymore in terms of the general public. Most people just didn't care about the show anymore. So it's an interesting contrast. The other thing I'll say about the deleted material is it doesn't help the pacing, but it sure as hell helps comprehension as you know, it still doesn't fix it, but it definitely helps, because you can tell whenever a deleted scene is inserted because the video footage is lower quality and there's a blur on screen where they had
That's
to
what
blur
that
out the
is.
time code. Yeah, they had to blur out the time code because the only surviving copies of those deleted scenes were like work print VHSs with time codes.
I
Oh, that's
see.
what that was.
They didn't have the original footage. Yes. So, like,
God.
you can, given that you can tell where the deleted scenes are, you can look at it and be like, wow, this scene just starting here would be even weirder.
Yeah, I can see that why that would have. Wow. Okay. So I think this is really interesting to compare to City of Death, like writing wise, because it's also very much a we're just running around and talking to a bunch of people repeatedly episode. Except this
And I
is
think
like,
some of the dialogue is genuinely good, too.
oh, some of the dialogue is quite good.
There's good stuff in here.
But also, it's incredibly confusing.
Yes.
Okay, I feel like I missed the introduction of Control because at a certain point I was just like, okay,
Yeah, I also feel like I missed that.
Yeah.
she might have been just showed up at some point. I don't know.
Yeah. Like, it's like I also like I had the thing where I zoned out like once or twice. You know, it happens. I'm deep in the throes of the like a dragon hyperfixation right now. You know, shit happens. But yeah, it's really there's a, you know, it is the one thing that I can definitively say about the episode is it is incredibly eerie and has incredible atmosphere and feels just so deeply surreal and unlike any other like story I've seen. But I feel like to some extent, some of that is because the episode literally doesn't have time to explain anything.
I do like genuinely enjoy a lot of the dynamics they set up, and I think this idea of like there's a bunch of people running around a house who are like revived humans that were collected by an alien specimen collector and they don't realize it is interesting. But then it also gets really confusing because you're not certain which people are aliens and which people are like people. And
Yeah.
that's not intentional. It would be interesting if it were intentional, but it's very clearly not.
Yeah.
And you're just really confused. Like, all the maids, are they meant to be aliens or humans? I still have no idea.
I think they're supposed to be humans because there's the scene near the end where Light like is like, yeah, I needed to figure out how they worked, so I took them apart.
Yeah.
God.
It's like the story somehow spends so much time. Like, I feel like the first 2/3 are just like too much setup, but like at the same time
Yeah.
it's not well done setup. So by the time you get to the
Yeah.
real antagonist, and I guess the real theme of like evolution, which like maybe you get to a little bit with like the I don't know, like the preacher guy, but like not really much. It's just like the
It feels like
yeah, it's just a weird spacing.
it,
of
it
everything.
almost feels like, I think the episode itself has kind of two different things that it's going for. Like, once is about, and I guess I can see how you could tie them together. Like, I'm thinking about it right now, and I think about how you could tie it together. But I feel like to some extent, like, the first 2/3 of the episode feel very laser focused on like ringing horror, basically playing a lot of Victorian attitudes for horror, like how like their formalities, the conservatism, the strictness, the racism and sexism, all of that. It feels like it's playing with that a lot, but placed in like a twisted, surreal horror hellscape. And then, yes, Light gets introduced and it shifts to the thing later. And I feel like, I don't know if this is actually Mark Platt's intent, but if it were me, what I would read out of this is because of, Victorianism being super rigid class roles, rigid gender roles, rigid expectations, all of that Light is kind of the ultimate form of that, where he is disgusted by evolution as a whole, whereas, the Doctor's stance is that it is you cannot fear change because it is literally impossible to avoid change no matter what you do.
Yeah.
That's what I think it's going for. It's a little bit cluttered, but I respect it for going there.
I did actually find that quite compelling.
Yeah.
What I find it misses with that is that, I don't know, it just seems that there's like an element, like the reason that like Ace is like has a connection to this story just kind of feels like separate of all of that.
Yes.
And that feels like a missed opportunity maybe. And like maybe you know a bit about this, Geoff, because you've watched more classic than us, but like is Ace's like history with this building like a thing before this episode?
I don't think so. Maybe it's mentioned that like she burned some house down in Perryvale or something, but again, so the thing with Ace is that Ace was the first time they really ever tried something like where companions would become in modern run, where like Ace has a character arc and like back and forth with the Doctor, and even here he's manipulating her. He knows what the deal is here and all of that, and this initially it's framed as he's trying to train Ace into being like his protege, like it's an exam almost.
Yeah.
Which is a very compelling angle. Yeah, I think there's definitely... So part of it is just it was their first stab at it and the landscape of TV at the time, and also part of it is just literally runtime constraints. Like, Seven and Ace only have... not counting Dragonfire, because Ace wasn't the main companion in Dragonfire. Like, it's a direct handoff from Mel to Ace in that story. Ace only has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8. Ace only has 8 on-screen stories with the Doctor as a companion.
Wow.
So part of it is just time. And I don't think it was necessarily meant to be this way. Like, they didn't know when they were making this final series until like Survive, like the very end of production, that like the show was not going to get renewed. So there were definitely, they were trying to, I think, set some stuff up too. I think he's not necessarily as manipulative of Ace in this story, as he is in Curse of Fenric, but there's definitely that aspect there, and also Ace talking about like why she burnt down the house as like being, angry because of a racist attack on her friends. Yeah. Which is a really compelling angle that unfortunately, they don't play into enough.
I like didn't combine those two lines in my head, because one happens at like 10 minutes into the first episode and the other is right at the end.
Yeah. Yeah. And you do go back to Perryville again in the last story of classic Survival, which I've seen, and there definitely is more, like, there is definitely an undercurrent of, if not leftist, then at least anti-Thatcher, anti-conservative political commentary in these seasons. So there's definitely like an aspect of that in Survival, but yes, again, they didn't have as much time, I think, and the execution isn't amazing, but like this was a time in the show where they brought in a bunch of young blood, new writers who had a bunch of really interesting and unique ideas, even if like they kind of were challenged in execution because of the fact of where the show was at this point. But yeah, like it's everything about the vibes and the setup and the ideas in this episode are amazing, and I'm sure that there's probably an excellent Target novelization out there of this story that's able to like actually go into more detail. But when you're judged with what's actually on screen, yes, it gets very confusing and a lot of stuff just kind of happens. I feel like episode 1 and like the back half of episode 3 are fine. I think it's just episode 2 kind of nothing happens in episode 2 really.
At once, nothing happens and everything happens. Okay,
yeah.
I have a question. What is Josiah's relationship to the light? I still don't understand that.
I think it's supposed to be that he is a life form, maybe from a different planet or some kind that had been cataloged or placed on the crew of Light's ship, who during Light's hibernation essentially took control.
I did not get that at all.
Okay.
Gonna be real.
Yeah.
And like the caveman too, it seems like implied that he just sort of got picked up.
The caveman got picked up. That's why the Neanderthal is there. Yes.
Oh yeah. Okay. What I really enjoy about this episode is there's a bit in the second episode where the doctor says, "Not even I can play this many games at once," and that's really how it feels.
Yes.
Because the whole thing is literally just like they're literally staying in this house, and the whole day is just running around having conversations with people while they all try to kill each other. And somehow, like, it just works. And at one point, they literally just sleep in the house. They go to sleep, and then they wake up again and just get back right back to all the shenanigans. And, like, that's why I kind of have to love this episode, because that's so fucking funny that I don't even consider it, like, a real story. It's just so hyper real that I'm like, okay, this is all just camp. This is incredible camp.
Yeah. Like, I put in my notes of, like, it feels like 7 is kind of pulling strings in the background, and it's of course, it's in the stage of 7 where, as opposed to the normal Doctor Who episode where the Doctor lands on a planet or something happens and the Doctor doesn't know what's going on and has to piece it together, 7 at this point in the show is like actively picking fights. Like, he is landing in places knowing what's going to go down and what he needs to do. So he's pulling strings in the background, but it really does feel like the vast majority of the plot or the events in the episode just kind of happen around Ace and the Doctor. Like, they don't contribute. They don't contribute a lot. Most, like, honestly, like, aside from getting the shit scared out of her and acting extremely lesbian at various points, Ace doesn't do a whole bunch either.
Yes, Ace does gay things that make my heart happy, such as getting the pretty Victorian lady in, like, a suit, period appropriate thing. That made me happy. And also, I think just attesting to how much, like, had to be cut or wasn't filmed even, I think the Doctor, like, frees control and promises her, like, freedom, and we have to get that, like, reference, like, later on after it happens. So another
like,
symptom
literally
of shit.
From my perspective, control gets introduced after the Doctor has referenced making a deal with someone. I don't remember if she showed up before that, because he's like, I've made a deal with someone, and then we, like, meet Control, and everyone's like, oh yeah, that's Control, we've all known her. And then she's just, like, betraying the light, and we never saw her not betraying the light, but apparently it was a thing, and I don't think we saw it.
Okay, it looks like at the beginning of part 2, like, when 7 first comes down to, like, the spaceship control room in, like, the basement, like, Control, like, talks, but she's not seen on screen. I think she's who's locked in that cell down there.
Oh my god, I see.
Yeah.
And that's just cut out?
No, that's not cut out. I went and looked that up in the transcript.
Okay.
It's just really, it's really short, yeah. Yeah. Also, like what is up with like So Josiah Smith isn't human. He's like an associate with Light who took control when Light went dormant. And he has this plan to take over the British Empire by having the jungle adventurer guy murder Queen Victoria. And he gives a reason for it, but it's like it's a weirdly human reason. Like, I guess it's maybe supposed to tie in with like the theme of rigidity, I guess. Which is funny because it's like, how do you make shit more conservative than Victorian England already was?
Yeah.
But
he wants to return with the V. Unfortunately, the werewolves got to her first, so.
yeah.
Damn. You know,
Yep.
Torchwood really should have been on this.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just, you know, I there's so much, like, it feels like a lot of, like, this episode, like, I can't, my final, like, statement on this episode will, I think, be somewhat positive. Like, it's hard for me to hate this thing because I just respect the hell so much about, like, all of it, but it really does feel like up until the end bit, like, up until, I think, episode 3, a lot of it is just coasting off of interesting ideas or bits or like good character writing but not good plot writing. Like, I think 7 and Ace is like consistently well written. Like, I have in my notes one of the bits where Seven's talking to Josiah Smith earlier on, and he insinuates that Smith is an alien, and he's like, no, look, I'm just as human as you are. And Seven's like, yeah.
That was great. Yeah.
Or, you know, Ace running around being gay for 10 minutes or something, which, again, it's really funny. It's really funny how in, like, almost every Ace episode, she gets really, really chummy with, like, a female side character.
Yep.
It's in literally almost every one. Like, I think the only one where it's not is, like, Remembrance of the Daleks. Maybe Silver Nemesis. I haven't seen Silver Nemesis in a long ass time, but in all of the other 8 stories, she gets really chummy with a female cast member.
The feeling when subtext might as well be text.
Yeah. Which, I mean, like, it was funny too, because I was thinking about like how this is, like, how in some ways, like, Ace and Seven's like whole deal is like the fucked up evil version of 12 and Bill. And I'm like, yeah, I guess that makes sense. Ace is also a lesbian. But yeah, just great, like, you know, creepy, weird shit, like imagery constantly. I think Light as a villain is kind of goofy. Like, just his visual design, like the way he looks is pretty camp. But like the shit, some of the shit that he does is like really fucking like interestingly, like uniquely macabre, like reducing the policeman to primordial soup, which is then served at dinner.
I feel like when Light comes in, things get really interesting. He's just so good. Like,
Yeah.
they just really sell him being this like nigh cosmic alien who's just really frustrated. Like, I love this idea that the whole conceit of the episode is, what if a guy got really psychotic about evolution because it was keeping him at work for overtime?
Yeah. It's interesting, yeah, because it does, I feel, thematically tie back into the Reverend.
Yeah.
Who like dismisses the concept of evolution because it's like man has always been the same as it has been, even though that's a straight up lie. Oh yeah, Josiah Smith fucking making that dude like revert back into an ape was also like great. Especially because like it ties in, like it's he already has the very Victorian facial hair, and then they take that visual design and then just slowly make it more ape-like throughout his time on screen.
Yeah, there are elements, I'm gonna be a dork here, ironically, there are elements of intelligent design in this episode, but it just doesn't all yeah, it doesn't all gel together as best as it really should, whether that's the time or the production literally leaving, elements of the story out. It's a shame when there is like detail paid to certain things, because you know that it can like happen and be good. And in a great episode like City of Death, where you have characters who are like side characters but still nonetheless memorable, it's like, do some of these side characters like have interesting moments and play well
No,
with the
yeah.
leads? Sure, but also like, like take it or leave it. I don't know.
Yeah. No, it is literally like, in terms of the side cast, Josiah Smith is interesting. The Reverend is pretty good, though part of that is just because he's utilized so little. Light is good. And like the adventurer guy is like kind of decent. Same with the other young woman, though again it feels like she doesn't really have much going on other than like having homoerotic subtext with Ace. But like Control, the fucking Neanderthal, like everybody else just kind of sucks. Like they don't have anything going on and like they take up a lot of time. And it's just like, boy, I am so not interested in these characters. I think because it's where, like, for all the screen time that they get, I don't like, Nimrod doesn't do anything interesting ever, really.
Yeah.
Same with Gwendolyn, the woman who Ace hangs out with. Like, they don't do anything. The characters who actually like do stuff in the episode are interesting. Everybody else is just kind of like set dressing that gets focused on a little bit too much, I feel. But yes, that being said, like, despite a slightly silly appearance, and honestly, is it just me or does he kind of look like David Lynch? Just a little?
Yes. Now that you say it, yes.
Dang it.
And if you can believe it, it's a Friday once again. But yeah, no, Light's really cool. And like, again, I feel like a lot of like the really cool, weird shit that I was mentioning happens. Like, it feels like the episode, like the story starts with a lot of like compelling, weird, macabre, like atmospheric shit in the first episode, and then just kind of devolves Lalamau through the second episode. And then when Light comes back in, like that shit starts happening again. It gets way more interesting, like him taking the maid and like disassembling her to figure out how she works, and you literally see him like holding a severed arm, or again turning that dude into primordial soup, or turning Gwendolyn and her mother into stone. Like, there's like, that's where all like the weird shit starts happening again, that I think it's way more interesting.
They're turning your ass into primordial soup on Light Twitter.
Yeah.
Yeah, that stuff is interesting, and like just conceptually and how it's shot and everything, and it makes me feel that like you could do an episode like this maybe if you really wanted to get to the core of like what Light is, and really hone in on the Victorian values and the evolution stuff. If this was like a modern like two-parter, like 12 Bill or like 12 Clara episode, I don't know, it wouldn't be as funny as this probably, but I could definitely see it like kind of working more in that like more, I don't know, tried and true format, especially with how it will eventually get to the point where they'll have gotten like the companion characterization down. So it's just interesting seeing like how that fits in like a classic milieu.
Yeah. It really, yeah. It just has a saggy middle half, and I think some of that is because like not only did stuff get cut down, it's like the fact that this shit had no money. Like, it is on one set, or like, no, because I guess the basement's a little bit different. It is on two sets pretty much, or two locations the entire episode, like the basement and the rest of the main house. Everything else is entirely trapped in this house, and it feels like a lot of the setup stuff like didn't get filmed either because it wouldn't have had Seven and Ace in it, or because it would have been too expensive. But unfortunately, that means that what got left is just kind of running around. And like, unfortunately, like the dialogue, because like, again, a lot of City of Death is running around, but the dialogue there is way better, and it makes up for it because you're having fun. Whereas here it's just like running around with like the worst characters in the story. But yeah, once we get to this last bit, I feel like it picks up again, and especially like how Seven, like, I guess, dispatches light is like peak Seven, peak Doctor Talk no Jutsu. Like, I fucking live for that shit. Where he's just like, oh, well, you can't destroy everything yet because you haven't finished cataloging everything yet. And he just starts listing like a bunch of like fictional beings. And he's like, those aren't real. I haven't found them. And he's like, no, you just haven't found them. Like, you need to keep looking. You haven't looked hard enough.
I really like, because it feels like it's not just something he pulls out at the last second. It feels like his whole conversation has been like ensnaring Light in these standards. So he like, it feels like a gradual process. And he just gets him there, and then he starts really pushing, and it feels like, okay, well, he's just been setting this up for like the whole time. It's very Seven.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, it's again, like, when this episode wants to hit on dialogue, it has some excellent stuff. Like when he says, even remains change, it's this planet, it can't help itself. It has this, I don't know, it plays like it, at its best, it feels like it is taking like the concept of evolution itself and managing to wring like horror out of it.
Yeah.
In a really compelling way. Like, it is this, like, it is an eldritch force that eldritch forces are terrified by.
Yes, I really love that. Like, that sensibility to it is incredible.
Yeah.
When it decides to have it.
Yes, when it decides to have it. When it plays with that concept of, evolution is almost entropy, I guess. Yeah. Unfortunately, yeah, the most of the episode is not playing with that. And then, yeah, I think the way it, like, what it does with the remaining characters is kind of silly too, where it's just like, okay, well, we're just gonna leave now, all right. And it's like, okay, sure, I guess. It really adds, I guess, to the surreal nature of it, because it really, I guess it really feels like, yes, it's missing stuff, but I think it would still kind of have a surreal atmosphere regardless, because of the fact that characters are either aliens or people from a time period with very specific attitudes. Like, it feels like Seven and Ace are like normal, and everybody else don't act like real people. They act like, in this surreal, like, dreamlike or uncanny manner, even the people who are humans. And I wish, unfortunately, like, it's too little, it is to some extent too little too late, but I like that bit at the end where they talk about, like, the house will still remember this. And like, that's why Ace was disturbed by it. That's why she burnt it down. And I do so love the final bit here where Ace is like, so I burnt it down. And Seven's like, any regrets? And she's like, yes, I wish I'd blown it up instead. And Seven's just like, wicked. That's such a good ending that I don't know if this episode entirely earned that final scene, but it's really good. It is one of the things that I have consistently remembered across this is like my third viewing of this story. And I tend to not remember anything except for, like, I completely forget every time that, like, light exists. I just remember all the weird macabre stuff, and then that final scene. That's all that sticks in my mind. Every time I finish this episode, I'm just like, yeah, man, sure, go off, I guess.
And you said this was the last one filmed but not aired.
Yes, two more aired after this one.
Okay.
But yeah, like it really does. It feels very indicative, I guess, of this being its final episode of like, it kind of sums up these final 2 seasons of Who in general, where it's like there are incredible, really interesting, like out of the box ideas that really push the boundaries of the show, even for today. I think like this, even if you had the ability to tell this story properly and you told it today, it would still be one of the weirder episodes for like modern Who. You know, you have all of that. You have the seeds of what companion writing would become in the modern era, and all of these amazing ideas, and nowhere near enough money or time to get them across. Like, there's still some great episodes from this era. Like, we've watched 2 already. Both Remembrance and Curse of Fenric are excellent episodes, but like, Curse of Fenric has a bunch of shit that's like kind of important to the story that's just not told on screen. And some of that, I guess, was to bring some mystique back to the show, but it really does feel like some of it was just because it's too ambitious for what the show could achieve at that time. But at the same time, you know, you gotta, as I've been saying this whole episode, like, you kind of gotta give it credit for it, even if it doesn't entirely work out.
Yeah, it's really, like, I was never bored. I'll say that. Like,
Yeah.
there was never a point where I was like, oh, this is so boring. I don't care. I was like, this is so much, and I'm really watching it.
Yeah. Yeah, like I said, when I finished the episode, I'm like, yeah, sure, man, whatever. Whatever you say, man.
Like, the whole time I was like, wow, I have no idea what's going on, but it's cool as hell.
Yeah.
Just like trying to write like a book report or review. It's just like, stuff did happen. There were themes.
Yeah.
That's pretty much how it feels. Like, I'm like, I couldn't tell you what happened in the story, and I like at any given moment, I didn't really understand what was going on, or like who the characters were, or why they were doing the things they were doing, but it was compelling.
Yeah. It's like doing this episode, like recording this episode has been really, really hard because like you've said, there's both a lot here and very little here. Like, I feel like it wouldn't work to just linearly go through the plot of this episode because so much of it is left unsaid if you just do what we usually do and go by the transcript. So a lot of it is, I guess, just us kind of talking about vibes and shit because that's what the episode does best, is it has immaculate vibes. It is vibes-based Doctor Who.
Yeah. Someone cooked here. I'm not sure what they made, but
yeah, it's like when you just throw a bunch of when you're playing like Breath of the Wild, and you throw a bunch of random ingredients into the pot, and it's like, well, you get something, and it will heal you, but it's not like a meal.
Girl dinner for British people.
Doctor Who's Girl Dinner. That's the title of the episode. Okay, cool. Glad we got that settled.
Great.
So
is there
I was about to say,
go ahead.
ratings?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, is there anything else anybody has to say before we move on to ratings? No. All right. Yeah. I kind of said it. I kind of said what I had in my write-up already, but yeah, this is the final episode filmed in the classic run, incredibly indicative of where the show was at its end. Mark Platt really makes a truly unique and weird story that's first forced into surreal semi-incoherency due to significant runtime cuts. Despite that, I have to give it props for just how out there and ambitious it is, even if it's like, it's not something I feel like I'd seek out and rewatch a bunch, but it is just a fascinating story. It's really hard. Like, I feel like, I guess, like a B. Like, I feel like I can't give it any higher than like a B or a B minus, just because of how hollow it is at points, despite me loving the vibes and loving the ambition. I guess it's a great introduction for Mark Platt, who would go on to write a little book in the Doctor Who Seventh Doctor books that came out after the show was canceled, called Lung Barrow, which has a reputation for being just completely batshit. Like, okay, Lung Barrow was the timeless children of the 1990s. Like, it's trying to do the same thing with the Doctor's origins, but is like way weirder from what I understand. Mm-hmm. And that was written by the guy that wrote this.
Perfect.
So, yeah, B minus.
Okay. I mean, yeah, I said what I did. It sure is an episode. There sure are themes. Characterization happens. Neat set dressing. There's a few cool exterior shots of the building that are pretty, I guess. Take with that what you will. I suppose in the Anthony Fantano paradigm of reviewership, this episode is not bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, solid D+ to weak C-. You sure went for it, and that gives you points.
It's that gold star with at least you tried written on it in Comic Sans.
Yeah.
Okay, so for me, this episode, I really am carried by the idea of a guy who really just wants to clock out, but evolution keeps happening, and it really just grinds his gears. And beyond,
it's kind of Kojima core.
Yeah. And beyond that, it's just like, Victorian horror vibes. It almost reminds me of like Coppola's Dracula, almost. Not as gothic, but like it's there. And beyond that, we get to see a bunch of weird characters do their thing. I think that they happened, and they probably had some conversations with each other. I recall that I think I might have enjoyed them. And yeah, this happened. And I enjoyed it. So I will say this is a 7.5 out of 10.
Truly, this is the classic Doctor Who episode of all time.
This is the most unique viewing experience I've had of any Doctor Who episode, to be certain.
Yeah, it sure is something. All right, well, it's that time again where we're going to spin a wheel here. There's a bit fewer entries on it this time because I took both 4 and 7 off of it so we could maybe do something else for once. But as always, looming is the threat of the Chibnall Demon Pit, which is where I put the Hell's Kitchen, like, horror sting sound effect in every single episode. Let's spin this shit and see what we get. Oh, well, we're safe. Oh. Well, we went from the end all the way back to the beginning. We're going to be kicking it old school with the first Doctor, and we're going to be watching a 6-part story called The Chase next time. We got Daleks next time, and like 60s Daleks too.
Is that what season episode?
The Chase is like season 2, I think.
I'm trying to remember if I've seen it.
Season 2, Serial 8. Final appearances of Ian and Barbara. First appearance of new companion Stephen. Oh, it's a Terry Nation one too. Okay. Yeah. That'll be interesting and another major mood shift. But yeah. Until then, you can follow the podcast on Twitter at B2TARDISPod. And I'm Geoff. You can follow me on Twitter at WheatleyDL.
I'm a stone-faced Victorian lesbian. You can follow us on Twitter at Ahura Borealis.
I am Miss AG Penis, and you can follow me on Twitter at AG Penis.
Nice. And we will see you all next time.